Without a doubt, one of the biggest controversies surrounding The Last of Us Part 2 is Ellie's decision at the end of the game not to kill Abby. A lot of people have a lot of different opinions about her decision, and today I'm going to dive deep into my personal opinion surrounding Ellie's decision, so let's get into it.
I'm leaving tomorrow.
To do this smart, we'd be leaving Jackson vulnerable.
Diving deep headfirst into this, I think one of the biggest reasons Ellie didn't kill Abby was actually because of Joel himself, which may sound absurd, it may sound like quite a confusing point, but let me explain before you come at me. When we get down to the root of everything, Joel quite literally sacrifices his life for Ellie, and the entire root of the actions and retribution that goes into motion in The Last of Us Part 2 all stems from Joel's decision to save Ellie's life at the end of the first game. We know that Joel didn't want to lose another daughter, but we also know that he wanted her to be a kid and live as good of a life as one can live as a child in a world overtaken by the infected and the cordyceps infection. That's why he took her to Jackson at the end of the game, which further proves that point. He knew it was safe and he knew he could live a life. He knew there were other kids there. And he knew that they both could live a somewhat normal life, and he knew that Ellie could be a kid there instead of living day by day, surviving off of almost nothing. When we think about it, Joel quite literally sacrificed his life for Ellie, and so that she could live a life of her own. We can see in Joel's death scene that he kind of has this let's just get this over with type of mindset. And this can further prove that he clearly has already come to terms and knew what was coming, and he knew he would face repercussions for his actions. And I think that honestly, he's come to terms with his inevitable fate. Now, I feel like Ellie herself failed to realize why Joel did what he did, and that can be proved throughout the entire game, a journal entry. Even Ellie said she really doesn't understand why he did it. Now, I feel as though during Ellie strangling Abby, she's overcome with the realization about Joel's decision, and she realizes that it isn't what Joel sacrificed himself for. Joel didn't want this for her, he never did. And the interesting thing is that this concept can be traced back to what Abby says to Ellie in the theater. We let you live and you wasted it, because quite literally this is what Ellie did throughout the entire game. And in that moment in the shallow ocean water, while holding Abby's life quite literally in her hands, she realizes that Joel wouldn't have wanted this for her, and that he wanted her to actually live a life for herself, which is very clearly not what she ended up doing, unfortunately. I think that Ellie's decision, and yes, I know this sounds absurd to some people, but I think that the decision not to kill Abby was actually for Joel. By killing Abby, she would have made the final cut and losing who she was with Joel and fully turning her back on what he wanted for her this entire time, what he sacrificed for her. And by letting go of who she was, she would also be letting go of a piece of Joel. Ellie would have been letting go of the last piece of her old self by committing this act, and that's something she realized, even if it was extremely last minute, she realized it nonetheless. Now, Joel's decision was partly selfish. I completely agree with that. It was a selfish decision, however, it was also a selfless one as well, and it's kind of a confusing point to make, but on one hand, he didn't want to lose another daughter. On the other hand, I truly believe that he wanted her to live a good life in Jackson, and that balance between selfish and selflessness, it can be seen, in my opinion, throughout The Last of Us Part 2 and even the ending of Part 1. I think Ellie's decision all came down to the realization she has extremely last minute about why Joel did what he did and what Joel wanted for her. We can see this because when she's strangling Abby, we all know that she pictures Joel, and that stops her from killing Abby, which is a point that I'd argue kind of proves my theory. Another key reason for Ellie's change of heart would honestly, I think, would be Lev. Abby and Lev reminded her of she and Joel. It's very possible that she didn't want to do to Lev what Abby had done to her those years ago. You can see on Ellie's face that the realization of Abby and Lev when she first cuts them down, you can kind of see the gears turning in her head of those two reminding her of Ellie and Joel. And Abby and Lev have a very, I would say brother-sister dynamic, but nonetheless, it's protector and child, and that's basically what Abby and Love were too, and it traces back to what Ellie and Joel were in part 1 and some of part 2. It's very possible that, honestly, Ellie saw herself in Love as well. The suffering wouldn't end with Abby's death. Even with how much she wanted Abby to suffer, in turn, Love would too. This dark cycle of violence was going to continue, and I think that's something that Ellie also realizes extremely last minute. And this heinous act that she would have committed wouldn't have ended her suffering. I think, in my personal opinion, Ellie would have still been alone. She still made the decision to leave Dina, to leave JJ. She still would have been alone, whether Abby died or not. This is just my personal opinion on Ellie's decision. It's one that I've always had since I played the game first. There is a lot of different views on this topic, and they've surfaced throughout the 10 plus months this game has been out, and some blame it on poor narrative. However, I think quite the opposite. In fact, Ellie's decision to spare Abby is quite literally one of the best narrative decisions I've seen in video games, especially Naughty Dog video games. The darkness and unlikely peace behind the decision is something that not a lot of writers would have had the guts to include, but Neil did, and that's something that I'll admire from him forever. Now, I'm fully aware that actually the majority of people were unhappy with the ending and Ellie's decision, and I completely understand their points. However, when we think about it, what would Ellie really have completed or gained by killing Abby? Either way, she would have been left empty and lonely. Killing Abby wasn't going to bring Joel back or bring her any peace of the loss that she endured those years ago. And I feel like that's something that people don't realize because they're kind of blinded by this idea of Abby being so evil and all of this. And I've seen a lot of people saying that they should have given us a choice whether to kill Abby or spare her, and I completely disagree with that. It's never been a choice game, honestly. It's not Life is Strange. It's not the butterfly effect. Well, I'll get into that in another video, but it's not a choice game, and it's never been a choice game. It's always been a game that the narrative makes the choices for you, and it's just something that you have to live with and you have to accept. And I think that that's something that's quite cool to play, honestly. But that's my views on Ellie's decision, and let me know if you have a differing one. Just be respectful, but let me know what you think about mine, my theory. And thank you for watching. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, subscribe if you're not already. My Instagram's in the description box. And again, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Endure and survive. Bye bye.